Hi there, it's Molly from Tabletop Teacher making your Mondays more manageable. Only today it's Tuesday and I'm comparing two different games, Werewolf and Resistance. Werewolf, or Mafia as it's called in some circles, is a social deduction game in which one person plays a werewolf, killing off members of a village, and everyone else plays the villagers trying to determine who the wolf is and kill him. It's played in two phases. First is the night phase, in which all characters go to sleep by closing their eyes. During the night, the werewolf wakes up and kills someone. Also in the night, one person plays a doctor, wakes up, and tries to save the werewolf's victim, even though they don't know who it is. And someone playing a detective wakes up and tries to figure out who the werewolf is. This is all facilitated by a game master or storyteller who watches the events unfold and narrates them in the second phase of the game. The second phase is the day phase, in which everyone wakes up and the storyteller tells them what happened in the night, who died or who was attacked and saved. The remaining villagers try to decide who the werewolf is and execute them. If they succeed, they win. If they don't, they go to sleep again and the werewolf takes another victim. The werewolf wins if they manage to dwindle the group down to just 2 or 3 players. In Resistance, you are members of a secret government resistance in a science fiction dystopia. Only some of you are spies. Or in Resistance Avalon, you are knights working for either King Arthur or for Mordred. Whichever version you play, the mechanics are the same. At the start of the game, you get a roll card, which tells you if you are a spy or not. Then everyone closes their eyes so the spies can find out who their allies are. After that, you try to complete 5 missions. If the good guys successfully complete 3 of the 5, they win. If the bad guys successfully sabotage 3 of the 5, they win. One person is chosen as a leader. They then choose the correct number of players to go on a quest. Everyone votes whether to accept or reject the team. If the team is rejected, a new person gets to be a leader and choose a new team. If they're accepted, each member secretly passes in a success or failure card. The cards are mixed up and revealed. It only takes one failure card for the quest to fail. And because only spies can play failure cards, you know one of the people on that quest is a spy. Subsequently, the rest of the game is spent yelling at each other about who the spy is. So why play a social deduction game in your class? Social deduction games are centered around critical thinking and logical reasoning, as well as developing a strong argument. Students may not think of it this way, but when arguing over who is the werewolf or the spy, they are using evidence and reasoning to support a claim. Teaching ethos, pathos, and logos, one of these games could make a great hook for your unit. Games like this can also be great for language learners because there is very little in-game text. Even the cards in Resistance are color-coded red and blue, so you know what team you're on. And they involve a lot of talking. But instead of the formal presentations that tend to make students nervous, they're busy outing their friends. Playing this game in the target language is a good way to practice informal conversation or help students get over jitters about talking in class, but it's also good listening practice. Both games involve a phase in which players have to close their eyes and listen carefully to a set of directions so they know when to act. Finally, such games are thematically appropriate for any unit centered on mysteries, or, because accused werewolves usually have a chance to offer an alibi, a unit on crime and the justice system. It could even be a great game for a psychology class, considering you are constantly trying to get into people's heads, no matter what your role is in the game. But which game is better? Let's take a look at some pros and cons. Werewolf pros. Since there are no pieces, this game costs nothing. Granted, a lot of people use playing cards to determine who the werewolf, doctor, and detective are, but you can just as easily do this with slips of paper or by tapping students once they've closed their eyes the first time. All you really need is enough people and your imaginations. And speaking of your imaginations, you can make up all sorts of wonderful stories, or theme your game of werewolf. Once your students get the hang of it, you can let one of them be moderator, which is a great way to practice storytelling or continue practice speaking in a target language, as well as giving that fidgety student a special task. Finally, I like this game because you can feasibly play it with your whole class. I played it with whole classes in high school and at parties in college. It's well suited for a large group of people, and it's easy to teach, especially if you're playing the role of moderator. Cons. This isn't really a small group game. I would recommend having at least 8 players. You need a storyteller, which means somebody doesn't exactly get to play. Now, in a school setting, this isn't much of a problem because the teacher is probably going to be the storyteller. And being the storyteller can still be fun because you're not just telling people when to take their turns, you're telling a story. Nevertheless, this is an off-sided complaint of Werewolf. Another off-sided complaint is player elimination. Personally, I don't have a problem with this. The game goes fast enough that I don't get bored, and I enjoy watching the story play out, even if I'm not actively participating. Of course, there are also ways around this, such as allowing the ghosts to sleep during the nighttime phase and to continue to participate during the daytime phase because, despite being dead, they have no more information than anyone else. But the biggest problem I have with this game is that students don't like to close their eyes. Even when they love the game, I can spend more time telling students to keep their eyes closed than narrating the story. But enough of that for now. Let's talk about resistance. Resistance solves the problems of Werewolf in the sense that it does not require a moderator, and there is no player elimination. Furthermore, while the game supports as many as 10 players, it can be played with as few as 5. But in my opinion, that's about all it's got going for it. Resistance is not an easy game to teach. The rules feel long and tedious, and I noticed this trying to teach it to my students. Though you can teach the game phase by phase, there are all these different markers and voting tokens, and the game can become overwhelming, especially for English learners or for students who don't play a lot of tabletop games. Also, it feels less dynamic than Werewolf. The big complaint my students had was that they felt more like they were passively laying down pieces rather than actively taking part in something. But my biggest complaint about Resistance, every time I've played it, it didn't feel much like a social deduction game, but more of a randomly accuse your friends and yell at people game. I never felt like I had enough information to really determine who was a spy. And even if I did, I never had enough evidence to make others believe me. For example, once a game of Resistance devolved into me and another player alternately accusing each other of being the spy, and everyone else just had to decide who to believe. They picked him, likely because they didn't actually know me, and we lost, because I was right. It was infuriating. But the player elimination mechanic of Werewolf is what prevents this from happening. If a werewolf vehemently accuses another player and that player dies, then everyone else is going to get suspicious. You have to be subtle. Also, if you die because nobody believes you, you at least have the satisfaction of saying, I wash my hands of it. You brought this upon yourselves, which can lessen the frustration. But the most annoying thing about Resistance by far is that students can't keep their eyes closed. Seriously, what's so hard about that? You do it for a full hour when you sleep in my class, but you can't close your eyes for 1 minute to play a game. I mean, moving on. Final verdict. If you're looking for a social deduction game to introduce to your class, Werewolf is easier, cheaper, and, in my experience, more fun. Now, if you are interested in Resistance, I recommend Avalon because it has some additional optional rules, including extra roles not included in the original game, and I think these roles go a long way in making it a game of actual deduction rather than random accusation. It was a good attempt to get rid of the need for moderators and player elimination, but I think that in doing so, the game became too complicated and reduced the opportunity to gain information. Is it possible there's a social deduction game out there that doesn't need a moderator or player elimination? Could there even be a game that students close their eyes for? You'll have to stay tuned to find out.